Hello again. I took the trouble to watch it was supposed to be a documentary broadcast on the BBC last week about events in England 40 years ago. I was aware that the three-part series had been put together by a black director who has very up-to-date and correct views politically. But I have to say I was shocked at the way that the story of a terrible event was twisted to fit in with a certain agenda. Older viewers might recollect the New Cross fire in January 1981. An all-night party held by Caribbeans in South London ended in the early hours of January the 18th when a fire broke out. 13 black youngsters died and the house burned down. We know now, although the television programmes didn't really go into the fact too much, that we know precisely what happened that morning. Two girls spilt some nail varnish on the carpet, and in a desperate effort to clean it up, they poured paint thinner all over the carpet. Later on, an armchair caught fire, either through a dropped cigarette or perhaps done deliberately as a revenge for some slight altercation. And of course the paint thinner helped the fire to take hold, and those 13 kids were burned alive. It's a ghastly tragedy, but it wasn't white society's fault. The rumour at the time, which was discredited almost immediately, was that a white racist had thrown a petrol bomb through the window, but that's quite false. There were two careful forensic examinations, one in 1981 and then another one 20 years later. Both confirmed that the fire began in the house and was not the result of any bomb being thrown. However, the thrust of last week's documentary was that the fire was caused by a racist attack, and that because uncaring police officers and politicians did nothing, there was a huge and violent reaction from black people, culminating in a series of riots. This is a horrible distortion. I can quite understand why the surviving black relatives would wish to see some sort of reason behind what happened. Sometimes when we lose a family member, it helps if we can understand why something has happened. You know, if there's actually a reason rather than it just being a random event. So for those family members, seeing this as part of a racist attack and a struggle for black liberation would have helped them come to terms with the death. There's no excuse though for somebody making a documentary to buy into that fantasy. Following the fire, there was what was called the Black People's Day of Action, which was organised by a group called the New Cross Massacre Action Group. And this, in the programme, which was called Uprising, I'm sure some of you caught it, was portrayed as innocent and peaceful black people being attacked by racist police officers. It was suggested that it was a precursor to the riots in Brixton and Southall, which took place a few months later. This is a complete lie, of course. Here's a simple question, and I'm thinking now about the Black People's Day of Action, and a great deal was made of the fact that it was a peaceful demonstration attacked by the police and, jeered at by racists and all the rest of it. When people wish to hold protest marches or demonstrations in London, which days do they arrange them for? Yes, that's right. They take place on Saturday or Sunday, because on weekdays the City of London and the West End are so busy it would create a terrible problem if you had thousands of people blocking the streets and stopping all the traffic from moving. Perhaps this was why the New Cross Massacre Action Group decided to hold their march on a Monday, March 2nd, 1981. This was a provocative thing to do in itself, arranging for thousands of people to clog up the streets in that way during the week, the working day. And the police tried to stop them from entering central London and bringing everything to a halt. As the march tried to leave the residential district of South London and cross Blackfriars Bridge to head into Fleet Street, the police formed a cordon across the road and asked them to take another route rather than creating chaos by heading into the West End on a busy day. When the police give such an instruction to a crowd, then one is very wise to obey rather than to set oneself up in opposition to the police. The black protesters, though, decided to make a fight of it, and they attacked the police line. After overwhelming them and getting into Fleet Street, looting began. There was no mention of that in the BBC's film, the fact that a jeweller's was looted, nor of the other violence such as white passers-by being mugged and assaulted. Perhaps the most deceptive part of the whole thing was that nothing at all was said about the second inquest held into the death in 2004. There was a printed message at the end of the final programme of the trilogy, simply saying it had occurred but giving no details. This was after an entirely new forensic investigation, a more thorough one, which proved without doubt that the fire began when an armchair was set on fire. Like the first inquest, an open verdict was delivered because there was no evidence to show who had actually started the fire. This programme is exactly the sort of thing that we expect these days of the BBC. It was essentially black militant propaganda guyed up to look like an objective documentary. Even for the BBC, though, it was a pretty awful piece of work.